New Yorkers, what if I told you that we didn't have to have a piece of shit mayor? And here to help me prove that we can have nice things are two of those nice things, Zohran Mamdani and Brad Lander. We are officially weeks away from the New York City Democratic primary on June 24th, and whoever wins the primary will go on to most likely defeat the Republican candidate, absolutely batshit crazy and unserious repeat runner Curtis Sliwa in the November election. And I say most likely instead of certainly, because while New York City is usually a firmly blue city, not only is the rest of New York State red as contrary to popular belief, Queens and the Bronx were looking unusually redder in the last presidential election, and Staten Island is always red, and New York City never could pick a mayor to save our life, so anything's possible. But even if Republican nut-ass Curtis Sliwa doesn't have a serious shot at winning, we are not out of the woods yet, despite the fact that our current disgraced mayor, Eric Adams, could not win the Democratic primary if his life depended on it as a result of becoming the first sitting mayor to be federally indicted for his corruption, stealing millions in public funds, running illegal straw donor schemes, covering up deaths at Rikers, bringing back stop and frisk, militarizing the subways, and selling out our city and immigrants to Trump and ICE. His ego would not allow him to simply accept that New Yorkers have had enough of his endless corruption and bow out of seeking re-election. So instead, now he's running as an independent. While it may seem unlikely that Eric Adams could win running as an independent, I'm reminded of the Buffalo race where progressive socialist school teacher India Walton beat the incumbent mayor Byron Brown in the Democratic primary, but Byron Brown then ran as an independent and beat her, only to resign halfway through his tenure so that he could accept a job as president and CEO of Western Regional Off-Track Betting, because it's always about the money. I say all that to say, don't count that fool out. But I've talked about Eric Adams more than enough for one lifetime, so I encourage you to watch any of these documentaries I've created about him, or my debate with Eric Adams himself on The Breakfast Club. But even without Eric Adams as a threat, we have still got our work cut out for us, because in spite of all that is holy and logical in this world, the current frontrunner in the race is still disgraced ex-governor Andrew Cuomo, even though Zohran Mamdani is gaining on that ass. Please do not let the name recognition and the Cuomo PR train fool you. Andrew Cuomo is a wicked son of a bitch. I know you saw him and Chris Cuomo doing QT shit on CNN during the pandemic, but that's just the Cuomo PR train hard at work, because while he was on TV convincing you he was the competent governor handling the of the pandemic, baby, that could not have been further from the truth. On my main channel, Olurin, I explained in detail in my video why Andrew Cuomo can't be mayor of New York City, why electing Andrew Cuomo would be one of the worst decisions New Yorkers could make, because we would be handing the keys to the city from one corrupt, power-hungry, abusive jackass to another. So I encourage you to watch that video for a detailed deep dive into Andrew Cuomo's horrible leadership and why he had to resign as governor of New York. But the short of it is that Andrew Cuomo is a liar who covered up thousands of deaths during the pandemic so that he could secure a $5 million book deal bragging about his shitty leadership, and our attorney general conducted an investigation that determined that he sexually harassed at least 11 women working underneath him. And since then, he's cost taxpayers $60 million retaliating against the women he harassed.
So at that time, our workers, our hospital workers, were in garbage bags. Andrew Cuomo actually stood in one of his ads. He's standing in front of one of the hospitals where the workers had to wear garbage bags. So I think it's deplorable that he does not stand up to the record that he has, the story that's not really being told, and that people aren't really remembering the full picture of what we all experienced under Andrew Cuomo as governor.
I think we have another leader in the same vein, Andrew Cuomo, who is running for Eric Adams' second term, and he's doing so in a manner that is trying to disconnect the dots of his own record, where he cut Medicaid and stole hundreds of millions from the MTA and hounded the women who courageously accused him of sexual assault with more than 10 credible accusations, and yet he is running as if he has none of that as a record.
Part of what is so gross about his campaign, I mean, look, he's an abuser, and so in every relationship, he is thinking, how do I manipulate the other party to get what I want? And that's what he did in sexual harassment. That's what he's doing, forcing New Yorkers to pay his legal bills for his sexual harassment and issuing subpoenas for the gynecology records of his accusers. That's what he did with the nursing home scandal, lying and undercounting deaths to protect his $5 million book deal. But I think he has an abusive relationship with New York City, where he hasn't lived in 25 years. This is not someone who loves New York and wants to solve its problems. This is someone who wants to manipulate the idea of an out-of-control New York.
Andrew Cuomo does not want to be mayor of this city. Shit, he don't even want to live in this city. Neither he or Eric Adams do, for that matter. What he wants is power, and that's all it's ever been about. We do not need power-hungry corruption from career adversaries to the people like Cuomo or Adams. But enough about who you shouldn't rank under any circumstances. Let me tell you who you should rank. And notice I said rank, not vote. New York City does ranked choice voting, meaning you don't vote for one candidate. You can rank up to 5 candidates in order of your preference, which gives you more options at the ballot box, as well as it makes it more likely that we don't end up with who we hate the most. So you don't want to only rank one candidate. You want to rank all 5 candidates in order of your preference. All 5, you hear me? Don't leave shit blank. And you want to be intentional about how you do it because it could make a big difference. For example, in the last race, it came down to Eric Adams and Catherine Garcia. Although Maya Wiley was ranked higher by more people than Catherine Garcia, because of Andrew Yang and Catherine Garcia's cross endorsements urging their supporters to rank the other, Catherine Garcia surpassed Maya Wiley. So here are my official endorsements and how I would rank the candidates for New York City mayor and why. At number 1, we have Zohran Mamdani, who has run one hell of a campaign.
Queens State Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani.
Zohran Mamdani.
Zohran Mamdani.
Zohran Mamdani.
Zohran Mamdani.
Wait, is that Zohran Mamdani? Assembly member.
And even still, I did not expect to be as impressed as I was when I interviewed him.
You know, this is a city that I love. This is a city that I've grown up in. I moved here when I was 7 years old with my parents, and it's a city that is becoming increasingly out of reach for working and middle-class New Yorkers, the people who built it to make it the thing that we love and the thing that we hope to share with the world, and yet it's becoming a museum in many ways because people are being pushed out of it. There's so many New Yorkers I've spoken to who don't know if they can call themselves New Yorkers next year because of just how expensive housing, childcare, even groceries are. And ultimately, I decided to run to make the city affordable so that New Yorkers could afford to keep living in New York City.
My second pick is Comptroller Brad Lander.
Yeah, I mean, I love being controller, but Eric Adams was destroying our city. I mean, he, even before he sold us out to Turkey and then sold us out to Trump, he just wasn't doing the things that matter to New Yorkers, wasn't making housing more affordable, promised people childcare, didn't deliver it, all these corrupt contracts, and it just got to be too much.
I am a big fan of Brad Lander because I can speak to his record. It might not have stood out to you at the time, but in my Breakfast Club interview, I call Eric Adams on not only his unconstitutional use of stop and frisk, but also his decision to flood our streets with NYPD units that had been disbanded for their disproportionate use of violence and murder of Black and brown New Yorkers. And it was Brad Lander who made that information available to the public, and it was his report that I quoted.
Now, you may say, Eric, I don't want to see a visible president of a uniform officer, and that's cool, but that's not what the overwhelming number of New Yorkers are saying.
And I'm saying to you, the New York City Comptroller Brad Lander recently put out a report finding that 50% of the city is disappointed and does not feel safe based on your rhetoric about the subways and your over-police presence. They have multiple reports, the New York Times, the Gothamist, the City Comptroller, and the Federal Monitor, who's tasked with making sure that NYPD and Rikers are in compliance with the law, have both submitted reports saying that since you became mayor, there's been a return of stop and frisk, that there have been over 15,000 stops, 97% of whom have been on Black and Hispanic people. A fourth of those stops and searches have been unconstitutional, and they've yielded very few results. Brad Lander is someone who gets shit done, and he has demonstrated that to us a million times.
Look, when Donald Trump and Elon Musk stole that $80 million from New York City's bank account, I uncovered it, I rang the alarm bell, and I forced the mayor into court to get it back.
So that's why he comes in at number 2 for me. My third pick is my state senator, Zohran Mamdani.
He was raised by a single mom in a rent-stabilized apartment, and our public schools put Zohran Mamdani on the road to a better life. How do I know? I was his teacher. As state senator, Zohran delivered on gun safety, the right to choose, and tenant protection. And now Zohran Mamdani is running for mayor with the boldest plan to build affordable housing and create after school for all.
It's time for a mayor who fights for us.
When I was in the ICU during COVID, writing legislation to protect my community, you were the most powerful person in this state, and you were in the governor's mansion taking a $5 million deal. Do you regret taking the $5 million, and will you give it back?
My fourth pick is former New York Assemblyman and aide to former President Barack Obama, Michael Blake.
We deserve better, and I want to be very clear that I'm running for mayor because we have to help New Yorkers make and keep more money in their pocket, have truly affordable housing, actually focus on public safety, transportation, education all at the same time, and transform what's happening in our city. As you alluded to just a few moments ago, all that's happening in DC impacts us. And as the only person who has White House, State House, and local experience, we cannot ignore that dynamic. We deserve to have a city that's working for us. Now, as mayor, local median income instead of AMI, it is more critical to actually have the expenses be proportional to your community, have an increase in the wages that individuals have as well, and have universal child care. If you implement each of these three, you can achieve that. But most critically, I'm actually saying how we pay for it. Focus on individuals who have vacant apartments here that is not their primary residence. Pierre de terre. You do that, you generate the revenue, as well as addressing what's happening with overtime expenses in the city. Those two things will actually reduce the cost for New Yorkers. Lastly, if we address the fundamental issue around housing, we should not have credit scores utilized when it comes to rent and home ownership applications. Those steps will put more money in New Yorkers' pockets. It's a plan that is paid for, and it's a plan that's worked in other cities.
As a South Bronx native family of Jamaican immigrants, the way we actually address affordability is by ending credit scores and increasing income limits for housing applications and having universal childcare that is happening not just after school, but throughout the weekends. We pay for this by having a vacant apartment tax for those that are not living in New York City, by withholding taxes to DC that Trump tried to take against us, and making sure, as much as I love the Knicks, and I'm sorry they fired Tibbs, but they had to, you have to tax what's happening at Madison Square Garden.
And my fifth and final pick is New York City Speaker of the House, Adrienne Adams.
We have a housing plan already. I have built and delivered 120,000 new units of housing. Now with the new proposal that we have in front of us, we have over 80,000 new units of housing that will be coming up and will be affordable to the people of the city of New York. New York is not affordable. I'm a mother, a grandmother, and I want my children to stay here.
If you don't know this about me, you haven't been paying attention, because your girl is a New York City supremacist. I love New York City. I don't think there's any place like New York City in the world. It truly is a magical ass place, and only a hater would tell you otherwise. But I think everyone on planet Earth knows the #1 issue to anyone so much as visiting New York City. What do you think are the most important issues facing New Yorkers?
I think ultimately it's affordability.
The one universal truth that absolutely every New Yorker knows is that New York City is expensive. And when I say expensive, I mean expensive. The cost of living in New York City is out of this world. New York City will make a brokey out of anyone. And the sheer amount of stress, anxiety, and depression you stumble into just trying to keep a roof over your head and stay afloat in New York City is crazy. And we should not have to live like this. And we need leadership who get it and who have plans for addressing the always present housing crisis in New York City.
You know, I think that if you can't afford to live in the city you call home, the consequences are that you live a life of anxiety. And it's an anxiety that has effects that you can name and those that you can't. And it's an anxiety that makes you feel as if you are far removed from any sense of stability. And I think stability is the bedrock of any New Yorker's life. And it's something we have to bring back to people, because without it, they are left teetering on the precipice of eviction from their home, from their life, from their dreams.
New York City owns 12 golf courses.
Okay.
That's 2,500 acres. And, fewer people are playing golf than used to. So I'm going to leave 8. People that, want to get a tee time. 8, if 8 city-owned golf courses, plenty. On 4 of them, we could build 50,000 affordable homes and make a bunch of them like that Mitchell Llama, from Co-op City or Amalgamated Houses or Penn South, affordable to working and middle-class families, co-op, and restore a pathway to homeownership for working class families. So housing is #1.
I grew up in a rent stabilized apartment. It is a place that my mom, my parents were able to find, the only affordable place they were able to find to raise me to be on this stage right now. But that opportunity has slipped away for too many New Yorkers. My wife and I, we want to put down roots in the same neighborhood that we grew up in. When you walk down Bedford Avenue, everything costs $1 million. Who has $1 million? Maybe some of the people on this stage do. But I don't have it, and I know you watching at home don't have it either. So I've been clear about what my plan is to drive down the cost of housing. 1 million homes over the next 10 years. We can actually do this with some leadership. The leaders of the past, like Cuomo, who had the opportunity to do this, only gave us a city that is more expensive than it was 10 years ago. I want to also extend pre-K and 3K from 2:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. so that we can draw families here and keep them here. And I want universal free after school for every kid in this city, because it has to be a city where you can raise a family and where we can move everyone to a path to success.
Zohran is my number one because he truly understands that the issue with affordability and the cost of living in New York City isn't just because there isn't enough housing, or that enough buildings aren't rent stabilized, or because enough of them aren't designated as affordable. What do you plan to do about the New Yorkers that aren't in rent stabilized housing?
You know, I think that we have to have a housing policy that speaks to all 8.5 million. And as you said, there's about 6 million or so who are not in that rent stabilized housing. And what I've heard from many of them are two things. One, that they can't afford a place to call their own home. And so as part of our housing policy, we've put forward a commitment to build 200,000 immediately affordable homes. The reason I say immediately affordable is that we need to construct a lot more housing across the board. There's no question about it. We also need to make sure that the housing we construct as something immediately for those New Yorkers who can't find anything on the market. And so that 200,000 number, it's a commitment of what the public sector will do, separate from the private sector, and housing that will be geared towards New Yorkers who make $72,000 a year for a family of four. New Yorkers who are the more than 100,000 who live in shelters, some of whom have vouchers from the city that'll pay $3,000 to a landlord, but they can't find a landlord who's willing to accept it. And the city has cut the funding for the source of income discriminations that would hold those same landlords accountable. So this is housing for those that have been left out of the market. And the second thing is I speak to New Yorkers who have a place to call home, but it's not safe. It's not habitable. I mean, just today, I was speaking at Friday prayers at a masjid in the Bronx, which was the same masjid that 17 New Yorkers belonged to who lost their lives in the Twin Parks fire 3 years ago. And they lost their lives as a direct result of the uninhabitable conditions that they were having to call their home, with doors that didn't close and heat that wasn't working. And that is also a story of city government's neglect and betrayal of working class people. I would make it such that when you call 311, it's not a waste of time. When you call 311, you can actually make an appointment for when an investigator will come to your home.
And it's not just that rent is expensive. Every mother thing in New York City is expensive.
I would say one thing I'm quite passionate about is food in our city. And I say that not simply because of the many restaurants and small businesses that I love and the street vendors, but also because when we think about what it takes to live a dignified life in our city, we know that one core building block is every family's ability to put dinner on the table for those that they love. And I've heard from so many New Yorkers that they are being priced out of produce. They cannot find groceries that they can afford. And, you know, I represent Queensbridge Houses, the largest public housing development in North America. And I've had to answer questions from my constituents as to why are there, 5 fast food restaurants in a 5-block radius, but I can't find anywhere to get groceries that I can afford, or that are fresh, or that are ones that my family deserves. It's exactly. And it's this twin crisis of sticker shock and food deserts. And we're the only campaign in this race that has a proposal to actually guarantee cheaper groceries. And we do so through a network of municipal-owned grocery stores, taking inspiration from Kansas, where this has been a successful model in a rural setting that was left by corporate supermarket chains, and in Chicago's feasibility study, where they found that this could apply in an urban setting, to then deliver that here in New York City, where we could finally live up to this belief that I would say most New Yorkers have, that food is something that every New Yorker deserves and every New Yorker needs, and yet it's something that only few New Yorkers can actually afford in the way that we all used to years ago.
Not only is the cost of living and eating in New York City out of this world, the cost to get around is a bitch too. If you have not been radicalized by standing around stressed in the subway station because you don't have what was $2.75 to ride the subway at the height of my law school struggle days, but has since had the nerve to increase, praying to God to send a good Samaritan to walk through the emergency exit so you could slip through and make it home, well, you ain't never lived in New York City, my friend. Or you was living your life like a Gossip Girl character, and I love that for you, no hate. But the rest of us understand just how expensive the subway has become for everyday New Yorkers who need to ride it to get around. And we need a mayor who understands that too, which is why Zohran would be my number one.
I would make the slowest buses in the country fast and free, and I would deliver universal childcare, no matter if your kid is 5 years or 6 weeks of age, because ultimately, these are some of the building blocks of life in this city. They deserve to be ones where no New Yorker is priced out of it.
My longtime issue with the way New York City is portrayed is the desperate attempt by both the media and the government to treat the homelessness problem as a public safety issue that exists in a vacuum, rather than an affordability issue, a policy issue that is a direct result of living in an incredibly expensive city that criminalizes the people who can't keep up with the costs, rather than addressing the cost of living and providing struggling New Yorkers with resources. And both Zohran and Brad get it.
Yeah, so I think it's worth people knowing it's only about 2,000 people who are mentally ill and unsheltered, sleeping on, the sidewalks or the subways. Meanwhile, there's 2,500 vacant supportive housing or SRO, single room occupancy units, but they're not eligible because, like Eric Adams' approach is these homeless sweeps, and you just move people along from where they are. Sometimes they'll be outreach workers, but what they offer is a shelter bed. And a lot of those folks have had bad experience in shelter, so they say, no, thank you, I'll just stay here. Sometimes they get taken to the hospital, or sometimes they get arrested, but they just come right back out again and cycle from subway to street to hospital to jail because we have literally no plan to connect them to housing. Meanwhile, cities like Houston and Denver and Salt Lake City use this model called Housing First that takes people right from the street into a housing unit with services, and they're able to stay stably housed 70 to 90% of the time. And we actually use this in New York City to end veterans homelessness, the same model. It will work to dramatically reduce the number of mentally ill people sleeping on the street.
What will you do to help homeless New Yorkers and New Yorkers that are struggling with mental illness that we see on the streets?
We are going to create a Department of Community Safety, the DCS. It's going to be a department that embraces evidence-proven strategies that have shown themselves to be successful across the country in dealing with 5 key areas: homelessness, the mental health crisis, gun violence, hate violence, and victim services. Right now, our city has what can only be described as a patchwork approach to these issues, one where they're operating in silos at a scale that isn't befitting the size of this crisis and in a manner that isn't actually effective. And what we found is that we are currently asking police, who have a critical role to play in public safety, to be responsible for every failure in the social safety net. And that means that they are responding to mental health calls. And I've sat with the family of Win Rosario, a young New Yorker who called 911 himself in the midst of a mental health crisis, looking for assistance. 2 police officers were dispatched, both of whom were trained apparently in mental health response, and they killed him within 3 minutes. It doesn't keep any New Yorker safe to continue down this path. And we look at cities like Eugene and Olympia and Denver, and we see examples of an approach that is not only more effective at addressing these issues, but also much safer for everyone involved. And that's at the centerpiece of this. The other point that I would make is when you ask New Yorkers where they feel least safe, oftentimes you'll hear the subway system. And what we're going to do is create a team of dedicated outreach workers tasked with responding to mental health crises and homelessness, deploy them in the 100 stations with the highest levels of those incidents, and have them actually provide services to the New Yorkers who need them most. Because right now what we have is a system which really is more about discourse than the delivery of public safety outcomes.
Public safety is important. It is important that we feel safe, but it isn't achieved by criminalizing homeless New Yorkers, continuing to over-police our communities, and putting more money into police than safer and more inexpensive alternatives, which both Zohran and Brad get. How do you plan to deal with NYPD? How do you plan to address some of the decisions Eric Adams made? And probably from there, I'll go to Rikers.
I think that we have to deal with the NYPD and with the Department of Corrections in the same way we deal with every agency and department across city government. And for too long, we've seemingly had 2 sets of rules, austerity for some and then a completely different approach for others. And I think what New Yorkers want is public safety. And I've made commitments that where that isn't actually what's being delivered, it's unnecessary to continue with it. For example, the Strategic Response Group is a unit within the NYPD that has been found to violate New Yorkers' civil rights on a regular basis. And that is a group that I will disband. When we look at the NYPD's communications department, when I began this campaign, they had more than 80 staffers in that department, and still they were unable to share the basic facts of a case. And you would see them often putting together what can only be described as, 5-minute propaganda videos about NYPD missions, sometimes even into college campuses. And ultimately what New Yorkers want are the basic facts of the case. And I called for that department to be rapidly downsized to deliver on that exact mission. I'm heartened to see the commissioner has cut it in half. It's about 40 staffers at this time when it was 80, but I still think it's an example of how our mission isn't always public safety. And finally, the overtime budget is more than $1 billion a year. And a lot of that also has to do with the fact that we are putting police on overtime shifts in the subway system and asking them to respond to anything across that system. And that is an amount of money that continues to expand. It's one that I said that I would eliminate. And oftentimes when you say so, it's seen as doing so, in critique of the police. But what we also find is police themselves have said forced overtime is a leading cause of them leaving the job because they don't even know what their day-to-day looks like having to work these doubles and triples. And I think that's at the core of so much of our approach to this is, does it actually make sense? Does it actually deliver public safety? Because oftentimes it seems like that's a goal completely removed from this focus instead on questions of headcount and questions of hiring more officers for jobs that actually should be held by social workers and mental health professionals.
Safety is a real thing. Like I said, I was out in Brownsville yesterday with the Brownsville Safety Alliance, and they want safety produced by the community, but they desperately want safer neighborhoods. My big commitment there is to end street homelessness for people with serious mental illness. We do not have to be a city where a couple thousand of our mentally ill neighbors sleep on the subway platforms and stoops of our buildings. You solve that, of course, with housing and services and a continuum of care that supports people. But nice thing there is we can take a big step toward a city that'll feel safer for people while also doing what's right and becoming a more humane city that doesn't have mentally ill folks sleeping on the streets.
The NYPD is infamous for their wanton brutality, as well as their unconstitutional use of stop and frisk, all of which became worse under Eric Adams.
Yeah, seeing the resurgence of stop and frisk is really depressing because after we passed the Community Safety Act, Jumani and I, stops came way down and crime came way down at the same time. We ran this experiment and it worked, and now here we are ramping stops up again. It's appalling and still overwhelmingly targeting Black and brown young men who aren't accused of doing anything except, walking around being Black or Latino in their neighborhood. So, we're not gonna go back to that when I'm mayor. One thing I will say is last month was, I believe, the first month ever when CCRB recommended, when every officer who was recommended by CCRB for discipline, the NYPD did not dismiss any of the cases. I give some credit here to Jesse Tisch for bringing an approach that stopped the car chases and takes more seriously the CCRB recommendation. So I want CCRB to have more resources because right now, in some cases, they're not getting to the complaints until very long after they happened and the statute of limitations is running out. So I have a plan that beefs up the CCRB.
How do we get them more power?
Well, my idea here is that if there's a dispute, so if the police commissioner disagrees with the CCRB recommendation, right now it's just up to the commissioner. I'd like to see it go to OATH, the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings. We have a city vehicle for that. That's one model to say, okay, if there's a disagreement between the NYPD and CCRB. CCRB are, in this case, more like the prosecutors, right? They took the complaint, they did the research, they bring the charge. Where NYPD agrees, as they did, last month, I think, on these cases, okay, straightforward. If there's a disagreement, then you should have an independent arbiter, and as opposed to now where the commissioner just both, judge and jury, let's let it go to OATH and they can make an independent call.
And like millions of New Yorkers, I am sick and tired of watching the budgets for everything we need, like education, housing, homelessness services, parks, and libraries, get slashed while the NYPD gets richer.
I think first we need to stop playing games. We've seen that Eric Adams has used the budget process as a budget dance, where he presents a completely false picture of New York City's fiscal health, using it to justify all kinds of cuts that he wanted to implement regardless of the actual nature of our budget. And then at the end of it announces that actually we do have enough money to ensure that libraries stay open. And we do have enough money to not cut the number of garbage garbage cans across our city. But that has meant that, city agencies and departments have spent months that they could have spent delivering service instead justifying their existence. It's such a distraction. It's such a waste of time. And it takes us back to fighting for the crumbs that we already know are insufficient. So the first is to be honest about the fiscal health of the city, to be honest about the revenues, to be honest about the pot of money that we actually have at hand. The second is to fully fund our agencies. No matter what amount of money you make in this city, many New Yorkers feel the same question of quality of life in different ways. But ultimately, so much of that quality of life is downstream from whether or not city agencies and departments are fully funded and doing their work at their full capacity. And right now, we have a mayor who refuses to fully fund them. And when he does allocate money for positions, he sometimes does so intentionally with no intention of hiring those positions. I know a number of New Yorkers who've been offered jobs. They've had to wait for 4 or 5 months to hear back from the city of whether or not they can actually take the job, even after getting the job offer. And that is a recipe for... It's ridiculous. Who would suffer through that? People need jobs. They need them immediately. They don't have the luxury of a 5-month waiting period.
This budget dance where you whack the mayor historically, and Eric Adams has done it, you whack the libraries, you cut the child care, you cut the cultural institutions, you impose a cut on the schools, mostly just to distract the city council, and then at the end mostly restore those cuts. It's terrible for the morale of the city. A lot of those are provided by nonprofit organizations, right? The libraries are independent. They have to give layoff notices to their staff when those cuts happen, and then you got families stressed out. They can't plan for the future. So I've proposed a framework for more transparent budgeting. Let's just level with people about what the costs are and have a real dialogue with the council. Instead of this silly budget dance of cuts and restorations. Let's not forget, we're going to have some really serious times coming with Trump. The tariffs are likely to cause an economic downturn that costs the city revenue. And he's already implementing cuts. Like he's announced a cut to some emergency housing vouchers that 7,700 New York families have, who will be likely to be homeless if the city can't figure out how to restore them. So, I don't know, Eric Adams today said that this is his best budget ever, even though he's just like pretending that, Trump isn't in office and about to cut the budget. So, we got to have a mayor that ends the budget dance, that protects the childcare and libraries and schools, and then steps up to protect us from Trump.
We can't have a conversation about the criminalization and over-policing of poor New Yorkers without talking about New York City's infamous pretrial detention center, where many New Yorkers have died awaiting trial. And you probably haven't heard about many of those deaths since Eric Adams became mayor, but it's not because they haven't been happening. It's because he made an executive decision to stop his Department of Corrections from notifying the public of those deaths, because we cannot be outraged about what we don't know about. Eric Adams had brought about a policy of not informing New Yorkers of in-custody deaths. What do we plan to do about that?
Yeah, so partly we knew that because I created this Department of Correction dashboard. It's funny, so we created this dashboard. We started demanding, because we have subpoena powers, so they started giving us this information. Then for a few months, DOC created their own dashboard to try to say that they were doing it, but then they let their dashboard lapse, and ours is still going. We were providing information on deaths in custody as well as just how many people are there and use of force and how many people are missing their healthcare and hospital appointments or not getting to their court cases. And we were providing deaths in custody, and then they stopped providing it. And I mean, that's just galling. We still wind up being accountable for it. Last year, actually, I'll ask you this question. How much do you think New York City paid out last year in claims against the city?
120 million.
$2 billion. Now, that's not all Rikers, wrongful deaths at Rikers or police misconduct. That's traffic crashes.
It's everything.
But still, $2 billion. And agencies have no incentive to reduce it because it's just paid by the general fund. And one of my plans is to put those claims on the budgets of the agencies that are responsible for them with an incentive. We'll give them the 5-year trend line. and say, if you can reduce the claims down below the 5-year trend line, you could keep half the savings for some new program you've been looking to run. But if you go above, it's going to come out of your budget, and we could get that $2 billion down and just have people have some accountability. So, I mean, maybe it'll be a receiver for a while at Rikers, but the Department of Correction commissioner should be on the hook for what is happening under their watch.
Yeah.
So that's what transparency can help with.
New Yorkers have called for the closure of Rikers for many years, especially since the infamous death of Kalief Browder, who was wrongfully held at Rikers for more than 2 years on false charges accusing him of stealing a backpack. After years of Rikers being out of control and tireless advocacy from a lot more people than just me, federal judge Laura T. Swain has finally agreed to place Rikers under federal receivership. But anyone looking to be mayor of New York City needs a plan for Rikers, and both Brad Lander and Zohran Mamdani have excellent ones.
First and foremost, we have to close Rikers. And what we've seen from this mayor, though, is he has rendered it almost impossible to do so by the legal mandate of closing it by 2027. And I think that is a testament to the fact that he has sought to put more New Yorkers in jail than ever before. Yeah. We are seeing that if Rikers was to close today, there wouldn't be capacity in the borough-based jails for all of the New Yorkers who are incarcerated because the number has grown since that proposal was passed. And what I would do from the very first day is pursue every ATI, every alternative to incarceration that we have to ensure that we keep New Yorkers who are yet to be found guilty or innocent of a crime, in a manner that actually not only expedites their trial, but also there are so many New Yorkers who can be kept at home in the process of waiting, as opposed to kept on Rikers. And I think one other point that often frustrates me is that Rikers has become the largest provider of mental health services in New York City. About 40% of the incarcerated population has a mental health diagnosis. It costs New York City $550,000 to put a New Yorker on Rikers for a year. I've looked at what is a far more effective way of dealing with serious mental illness, SMI, is a clubhouse model. These institutions that are these services that are created that are in certain neighborhoods across New York City. One of the most well-known versions of it is Fountain House, where they provide services peer-led, also psychiatric assistance, and it's for New Yorkers with serious mental illness. It costs about $4,000 to be a member for the year. That is the cost of being on Rikers for 3 days or being in a hospital for 2 days. And it's an entire year's worth of services that has been shown to have immense positive benefits to both employment rates, a lack of loneliness, a feeling of belonging, and also a reduction in the likelihood of being hospitalized as an inpatient.
First, I'm committed, very committed to closing it. I was one of the first council members to come out publicly for closing it. I helped get the Lippman Commission created when Melissa Mark-Viverito was speaker, and we had, Kalief Browder's mom there on that day. And it's just worth remembering. Kalief spent 3 years at Rikers being accused of stealing a backpack. And wound up spending, much of that time in solitary, and then died by suicide after he got out. And that's what Rikers, nobody gets better there, and we get worse as a city. So closing it is really important, and I am committed to it. It's not going to be closed by 2027 because the borough-based jails are not going to be done, but I will get it closed as mayor. And that takes a few steps. One thing is just reducing the amount of time trials are taking. Just to back where they were in 2019, we let it get a lot longer during the pandemic. And that accounts for about 1,500 of the people who are there just because their trials are taking so long. And again, Kalief didn't need to be should not have been at Rikers for 3 years accused of stealing a backpack, but 3 years is just what are we doing? So that's one big thing we can do. And then on any given day at Rikers is about 1,500 people with serious mental illness. And, we call it our biggest psychiatric institution, but it's not a psychiatric institution. Right. It's a place where people decompensate and get even worse. So there are much better models for secure treatment. Well, first, if we have the Housing First model in place, lots of those folks would be in homes and wouldn't have been arrested in the first place. But for people who are arrested and have serious mental illness, of course, they should be in secure treatment facilities. Eric Adams was supposed to build 360 of them. De Blasio actually left a plan to do it with H&H at Bellevue and at North Central with a therapeutic model that's secure but actually provides treatment and help people get better. 0 of those units have been built. So with secure treatment for people who are mentally ill, getting trial times back down, and getting the borough-based jails built, we can close Rikers. Now, of course, what would be even better to do is get at the root causes and provide resources in people's neighborhoods so young people have jobs and housing and after-school programs. I'll never forget, I was thinking about this the other day. I went to a limited secure foster care facility a few years ago. And I was talking to a kid there, like late high school years, who was saying it was a lot better than any place he had been before. And I was like, oh, that's good. So you want me to go back to the council and say we need more of these? And he said, no, council member, I want you to go back and save after-school programs, because if you hadn't eliminated my after-school program, never would have gotten in trouble in the first place.
Okay. That makes sense. Has anyone spoken to you? How do you feel about the people who oppose the borough-based jails? They feel like it undermines the idea of what we're looking for with closing Rikers.
Yeah, I mean, look, I appreciate the desire to have many fewer people incarcerated altogether, and that should be our vision, right? Like, what can we do if we do better to invest, like I'm saying, to invest in after-school programs and help people with career and technical education and provide our young people with mental health care and go look in on the families whose kids are increasingly absent from school. Like, there are so many things we can do to cut down on crime and disorder, and I guess what I would say is, at the moment, the path to closing Rikers is I think pretty straightforward, and it involves like building those borough-based jails, getting trial times down, having better treatment facilities for people with mental illness. And we have to close it. It is a place that is, stealing lives. It really is inhumane. So I understand and, respect the point of view of people that would like, but I think if we don't get those borough-based jails built, Rikers is just going to stay open and people are going to be stuck there for decades. And I really don't want that to happen.
I understand that. I completely understand that, especially from a practical position. I guess what people would worry about is, we don't want the idea to make it seem as though Rikers is not especially evil because of the ground it's on. You know what I mean? It's not the soil that's making Rikers evil, right? And it's this institution in of itself. So I guess the fear is, you don't want to just take all these people that we don't think should be incarcerated pre-trial in and of itself, these thousands of people and New Yorkers that are packed on one another in Rikers. You don't want to just take them and place them in the same volume of people, just into different jails, right? And also risk. I guess another follow-up question I'd have is, what do we think is the plan to ensure that these borough-based jails do not become what Rikers is?
Yeah. Well, let me say first, look, that goal of not having people needlessly incarcerated is a good goal, and again, this is all upstream policies. If we provide that good, affordable, supportive housing and get people on the street, a lot fewer people are going to get arrested and wind up in Rikers in the first place. If we can expand mental health and the drug treatment courts that give people a path to a program that helps get them on the right path. A lot of people that get arrested for shoplifting have substance abuse issues, and there's good drug treatment courts that say if you take part in a program, then you can wind up getting where you need to get without winding up incarcerated, either waiting trial or post-trial. So that work is important, and we should not lose sight of it. Like, that is the goal, and reducing trial times means fewer people. So I agree with that. I do think it is like Rikers is especially bad. I mean, there is a culture of impunity. That's why I support a receiver there.
I was just about to ask you about that. Okay, good.
So I support a receiver for Rikers, and I just think there's some changes that need to be made in the way it is run. There is a staffing culture of impunity that has to be reset when the borough-based jails open. And as mayor, I'll be committed to making sure there's real accountability and that you get back to thinking about how you're Look, I think New Yorkers want accountability. They want accountability when people harm their neighbors. They want accountability when officers abuse force. They want accountability when top brass or sexual harassers and abuse overtime. They want accountability when elected officials spend lots of money on programs that don't work.
Yeah.
But right now, I'll just give you one more housing example. There's a law. It happens not. It's called the Brad H. Law, though it doesn't have anything to do with me. It says that when somebody's coming out of Rikers, there must be an assessment to see if they have housing and if they're eligible for supportive housing. And we know that a huge percentage of people are being released into homelessness with no services, and we just keep doing it. So, what has to happen through that receiver and then through setting up the borough-based jails in a less torture island way is with attention that recognizes, okay, there's supposed to be a system here for accountability and people go through the courts. And there has to be an orientation to helping solve problems and recognize if you put people right back on the street, homeless, or you don't help them with mental abuse or with mental health or substance abuse problems, you're just going to keep the cycle going. And we can do it in a much more humane and a much more effective way.
New York City isn't just supposed to be a sanctuary city for immigrants. It is and has always been the home to millions of immigrants, just like yours truly. How do you regain the trust of New Yorkers, like a city that is built on, has so many immigrants, right? A city that prides itself on being a sanctuary city, but in the last Eric Adams administration, it's turned into one where the propaganda is against immigrants, where he's actively working with Donald Trump's administration to harm immigrants in his own best interest. How do you think you go about addressing what's happened there?
On immigration, I think it's worth people remembering 40% of New Yorkers are immigrants or foreign born. 50% live in mixed status households. Many, of course, a lot of Latino families, but many Black families and many Asian families, and still plenty of white ethnic immigrant families too.
Right.
Including 50% in mixed status households, including 1 million children. That's the future of New York City, and we have to show up and fight for it.
And not only do we need a mayor who gets how intrinsic immigrants are to the fabric of New York City, not only do we need a mayor who won't conspire with Donald Trump and ICE to treat immigrants like criminals and animals, we need a mayor who will actively fight back and protect us. How do you plan to address what Eric Adams has done to the city in terms of immigration? How he has kind of upended our idea that we are a sanctuary city, how he has, enabled this kind of xenophobia and propaganda towards immigrants, and how he is obviously working with ICE and Trump to do immigrants dirty. How do we plan to address this?
I think we have to turn the page on this chapter of failed leadership and leadership that has sought to engage in demagoguery over any delivery of public service or public dignity. And, if elected, I would be the first immigrant mayor in generations of our city. And I also think that representation in and of itself is insufficient. It has to be used as a platform to deliver representation in policy and in actuality. And what I've heard from so many immigrants is, one, a sense that our city is turning its back on our own sanctuary city policies. These are policies that have been in action for decades, that before Eric Adams were defended by Democrats and Republicans alike, and that have made our city safer. And I would adhere to those policies. I would actually establish a commission to ensure that we had 100% adherence to it, because right now the city's policy is that the city will not allow ICE agents into city school, hospital, any property or property of a city contractor without those agents showing a signed judicial warrant by a judge. And I serve on the city's committee in Albany in the state legislature. Every year the mayor comes up, I get 3 minutes to ask and answer any questions with him. My first question was, will you follow this law about sanctuary city policy? And he refused to answer it. And we need to have a mayor who speaks clearly and a mayor who establishes an oversight body to ensure that there is full compliance. Because when you're not clear, you see that the fear that spreads across the city is immense. I mean, we've seen a dip in attendance results of about 5% across city schools. And I've heard from certain principals about 20%, because immigrant families are scared of sending their children to to school not knowing if they will be picked up by an ICE agent. And they deserve to have a mayor who'll tell them clearly that won't happen.
President Trump will target whomever is the next mayor of this city. President Trump even targeted, in many ways, accomplice Mayor Eric Adams, who has collaborated with the Trump administration at almost every opportunity. And still, in the midst of that collaboration, we saw that New Yorkers are being taken off the streets in their apartment building lobbies. We have $80 million being taken out of our city bank account. So I don't think there's any question that there's any mayor here that will be free from being attacked by Donald Trump. What's more important, however, is that we have a mayor who will actually fight back. And that's what I will do. I am Donald Trump's worst nightmare as a progressive Muslim immigrant who actually fights for the things that I believe in. And the difference between myself and Andrew Cuomo is that my campaign is not funded by the very billionaires who put Donald Trump in D.C. I don't have to pick up the phone from Bill Ackman or Ken Langone. I have to pick up the phone for the more than 20,000 New Yorkers who contributed an average donation of about $80 to break fundraising records and put our campaign in second place.
First and foremost, anytime Trump and Elon try to take our funds, we will withhold taxes and sending in D.C., specifically working with companies that have contracts in New York City and say, you will not abide by unconstitutional behavior. Second, we will ban ICE at our schools and our places of worship. We will designate them as safe havens because there is no reason at all that ICE is going after our immigrants.
Before I let y'all get out of here, let's make sure we go over the most important takeaways from today's lesson. Number 1, under no circumstances do you rank Andrew Cuomo. Leave him off your ballot altogether. Number 2, rank Zohran Mamdani number 1 and Brad Lander as your number 2, or vice versa. And you can get creative with 3 through 5, but just so you know, these are my choices one more time in order so you remember. Number 1, Zohran Mamdani. Number 2, Brad Lander. Number 3, Zellner Myrie. Number 4, Michael Blake. And number 5, Adrian Adams. Let's not fuck this up, New York.